Drawing, like so many other skills, is a matter of being able to think of several things at once. Since the conscious mind seems to be able to think about only one thing at a time, the subconscious mind must take care of a good deal when we draw. So the process of learning to draw demands that we acquaint the subconscious mind with a certain amount of material, so that the subconscious can largely take over the control of our hand. We who choose art as our medium of expression should realize that it has certain fundamentals from which we progress, just as there are fundamentals of literature, drama, or music. Success in the creative fields is always accompanied by distinctiveness, something that singles one out as an individual and sets him apart from the crowd. Most of us take for granted that the world we see is three-dimensional. We seldom question our ability to judge depth or distance. There is such another world for the graphic artist. Of course, as a person, he lives in a three-dimensional world, as everyone does, but the world in which the artist really functions is his picture surface, and this world has only 2 dimensions. I've just been reading from 3 of the authors in this series, which I study, the art of storyboarding. And these 3 authors are Robert Beverly Hale in his book Drawing Lessons from the Great Masters, Andrew Loomis in his book Successful Drawing, and Don Grant in his book Composing Pictures. And I chose these 3 books for a very specific reason, mainly that they cover nearly all the material that Robert Beverly Hale talks about acquainting the subconscious mind with. And this is the material, at least in the form of books. There's other materials, for example, the geometric solids, which are a material that the artist who wants to draw in this style must acquaint themselves with, as well as materials like the figure, anatomy would be another material. So, in my way of thinking, these 3 books have the vast majority of material that will be needed to understand in terms of technique and theory, and really all the text, all the words we need, and all the diagrams and demonstrations of drawings, which we can't really get from a book because we can't watch how these drawings were constructed in real time. We only have the finished drawings they show us. Sometimes they'll show you a step-by-step, but even then it's still takes a lot of imagination to sort of conjure up in your mind's eye, how did they do these drawings? How did they what sort of movements and performances of the hand and eye led to these drawings? And that's where I can step in, and that's where the power of video is going to help us greatly in documenting the process of creating drawings in this style. In the style of, in the case of Robert Beverly Hale, he doesn't share any of his personal drawings, but he does share copies of the great masters, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, Rubens, Titian, even all the way up to Rembrandt and Degas. So in his book, Drawing Lessons from the Great Masters, we get a library and an analysis of studying the Renaissance up to the 20th century, the greatest draftsmen of the era in art history. And really, I think it's important because it's sort of the seeds of where we want to go with storyboarding. We think of storyboarding, we think of film and television, but it really grew out of the Renaissance. It really grew out of their idea of illustrating quite often biblical stories in fresco, and their desire to capture realistic anatomy and depth with linear perspective. Then we move on, building upon that, to storybook illustration and novels and other fiction that really peaked, I would say, in the early part of the 20th century when Andrew Loomis was working. And we can find in his work this very powerful simplification of the style of the Renaissance masters, where his anatomy and his perspective are true to, you could say, a realistic, accurate, he calls it intelligent perception. And so in his book, he goes over many of the most practical ways of creating a drawing and creating an illustration. He worked in illustration mainly. Robert Beverly Hale taught at the Art Students League of New York. They were mostly focused on fine art. So, they would spend months, years to finish a painting or something like that. And usually the drawing was just a preparatory stage for a painting. In the case of Andrew Loomis, he was working in the area of magazine illustration, and for them, they had a much tighter turnaround. They're working under deadlines. They're not working just for an artistic sort of motivation, but a commercial motivation. And I think that there was a lot to learn from that, because the artist had to become disciplined and really develop a sense of simplification in their work, and the sheer volume of their work increased. So they're doing a lot more compositions, they're doing a lot more rendering quickly to sort of get the impact across and tell the story and communicate, but in a very efficient way. Then we move on to composing pictures by Don Graham. Now, here it's very interesting because he was working at the Chouinard School in California in the 1930s. And at that time, Walt Disney asked him to start teaching his animators, who had been just doing cartoon sort of caricatures of animals and things in a very simple style, I guess. And he wanted better draftsmanship in the studio. And so he hired Don Graham to lead that and participate in that. And of course, his book, Composing Pictures, incorporates some of that knowledge he learned while teaching animators and working with animation. And he has a chapter in here about animation. So really, we're tracking sort of this progress of the Renaissance. Let's really capture reality. Let's study anatomy, right? They're dissecting corpses to find out the muscle structures and the bone structures and how they actually function. Then we go into book illustration, magazine illustration, newspaper illustration, and these were drawings and illustrations that were designed to be printed and reproduced in great high volume. And then we get to animation, which is really even more of a simplification of drawing, because if we're going to think about volume here, we could say that the Renaissance had the lowest volume, right? One fresco. There's only one Sistine Chapel. There's no copy. There's no way to copy it, really. You could photograph it, but it's not nearly the same as being in the church and looking up at the ceiling. The ceilings are curved, so in some ways there's no way to reproduce these Renaissance masterpieces. Then you have basically one-offs, right? Then we have illustrations that are done for print, so there's thousands or even millions of copies. And then you have animation where your drawing is only seen for 1/24th of a second. So now we're getting into the like, if your drawing's only going to be seen for a fraction of a second, then it has to be even more, in some ways, more simple to read quickly. If there's too much detail in an animated drawing, it confuses and distorts the mind of the audience when they're trying to follow the motion. If they're getting stuck into details, then it's going to break up that flow, that feeling of movement, which is so critical to animation to give it the illusion of life, as Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston call it. So really, these three books track the history of storytelling through pictures. And they were also, published. Each one of them was published over, 60, 70 years ago. So there hasn't really been much improvement, to be honest. You could argue that the Disney Renaissance of the 90s was probably the best sort of leap forward in terms of drawing. But really, in terms of teaching drawing, we have not been able to top these three men, is my position. I've read through as many of the books on drawing as I can find, from the oldest books going back to the 1600s all the way through, and their work is okay, and I'm sure it's actually excellent, but the problem is the language is just so hard to tease out the meaning because it's so far back in time, and the ability to reproduce drawings wasn't there. The technology wasn't there, so those books are usually pretty scant on illustrations and diagrams and things like that. So these three books are really the I would call them the holy trinity of drawing, especially for animation and storyboarding. And they each offer sort of three different ways of developing. In Robert Beverly Hale's book, I use this book mainly for reference. I can open his book and flip to a drawing and then do a study of it. And just try to copy that drawing. With Andrew Loomis's book, he has so much technical details in here about perspective and constructing sort of the construction behind an image, and that's really helpful when you're taking something, a small idea, and really want to flesh it out. Take something like a thumbnail sketch, and you want to enlarge it. Well, usually a thumbnail sketch has very little construction in it. It's almost all gesture and vague tones and things. So when we want to expand upon that and add more information, Andrew Loomis offers the most sort of technical advice on how to build and construct your picture. And he has solutions in here to overcome very challenging perspective problems, which I think is critical to getting a believable image, and an image that doesn't violate what he calls intelligent perception. And then Composing Pictures, I think, is the book I would recommend to read first, because it has the broadest scope of art from all around the world: paintings, drawings, abstract art, abstract non-representational, and realism. And he has art from Asia, he has art from Mexico and South America, Africa, different countries in Africa, and as well as Chinese, European, Japanese. He has just basically a sample from like every tradition is sort of, if not getting into the specific details of any one of them, but he does cover the most material, as well as supplying his own diagrams. So he does his own drawings, and I would say this is definitely the book to start with in terms of getting a broader picture and beginning from a very general to more specific way of studying. So you want the overview first, then move into some more details, and then eventually get into the really niche knowledge of the medium. And I have put those as sort of Composing Pictures first, then Successful Drawing by Andrew Loomis, because again he goes over a very wide-ranging set of tools and techniques to illustrate, and then Andrew Loomis last, because it's really just anatomy, that book. And then the other book he has, which is Anatomy Lessons from the Great Masters, which is another 100 or so masterful drawings. But again, that just focuses on human anatomy. So it's really the most detailed and close-up form of studying, which is why I put it last. Even though Andrew Loomis has anatomy in his book, he uses only his own drawings to illustrate his ideas about anatomy. All right, and so those are the three books that I'm using, and the way I use them. I also have my 6 basic drawing skills, which is a way of studying drawing without sort of missing anything. So this is my attempt to kind of define what are the parameters of what you need to include in a studying practice, to make sure you're not going to fall behind in any critical areas. So I have here the 6 basic drawing skills: line control, composition, perspective, contrast, solids, and anatomy. And these, in my opinion, are all the skills I have. I like to read the definitions of them. So I came up with these definitions myself. I define line control as the ability to move the pen with precision and grace in every stroke. Composition, the ability to arrange all the elements in relation to each other and the frame to create a unified whole. Solidity, the ability to create the illusion of form, weight, and contact. Depth, the ability to relate everything in the picture to one point of view in three-dimensional space. Contrast, the ability to control the relationship of light to dark with subtle gradation. 6, the last one, anatomy. Knowledge of the forms of the body parts, their location, and the ability to relate their proportions to the whole body. And to the right here, I have a diagram with some symbols to illustrate mentally to kind of help remember. Now, the reason I say that these are, in my opinion, the 6 basic drawing skills are the fundamentals. I kind of was comparing them to, in Andrew Loomis, he has what he calls the 5 P's and the 5 C's, and he defines those as sort of the kind of everything you would need to know in order to make a successful drawing, right? And that if your drawing isn't appealing in some way, or it feels off in some way, that you can look to the 5 P's and the 5 C's and find out where you went wrong. Now, I think it's a good idea to have something like that, but I sort of disagreed with the way he defined the 5 P's and the 5 C's. First of all, there's too many for me to remember. 10. I mean, he tried to break it up into 5 and 5, but really there's 10 total variables that you need to be able to control. And I think that's unnecessary. And the other thing is that he did not define these abstract terms in a concrete way. So the ability to move the pen with precision and grace in every stroke is a definition of a skill, not a definition of knowledge. So if you can perform this, right? Some people naturally have such beautiful line control that their movements are always precise and graceful. So they don't necessarily need to be able to explain how or why they do that, but they can demonstrate they have the ability. And so I wanted my drawing skills to not only to show you where you might have gone wrong in a drawing. If you have a drawing that you're looking at it and you are thinking this is off, but I'm not sure why, you can use the 6 basic drawing skills to break that drawing down and analyze the 6 different factors that go into making a picture appealing. And you can identify which one, or if there's multiple ones, where your skills are lacking. And then you can focus on that skill. Then you can perform exercises to train that skill. And it's very practical in this sense. So it gives you that. It gives you sort of what Andrew Loomis was trying to do, I think, in a simpler way. And I think if we can make it simpler and easier to understand without losing any quality or losing very much quality, then I think it's a superior method. Now, the other reason 6 basic drawing skills I think are really important is when you're developing a practice routine for anything, whether, as he says in here, art has fundamentals just as there are fundamentals of literature, drama, or music. So to me, these are the fundamentals. And if you neglect any part of the fundamentals in your practice, let's say you are, let's say you're practicing music. Well, you might be playing songs, you might be studying to read notes, but if you're not practicing scales, then many would argue you're missing one of the fundamentals in your musical practice, and it's going to hold you back. So what we want to know before we start a practice regimen, or develop a practice routine, or develop a habit, is we want to know that we're going to practice the necessary components and not leave out any really important piece. And that's really challenging to do if you're just a beginner and starting out. At least for me it was, because I thought, okay, I could do some master studies, I could copy, I could do some of these sketches where I try to copy drawings from the great masters, right? Okay, so now I was feeling like, yeah, I'm making some progress. I'm learning things, but if you look at this, there's no real fundamentals of like really depth or composition. There's really just sort of line control, anatomy, and maybe a little bit of contrast. But we're missing some of the key ingredients to make a really powerful drawing. So I was struggling with that, and I was thinking, man, but then I'd be practicing perspective, and I'd be doing, putting out horizon lines and drawing cubes and things like that. And I kept thinking to myself, well, okay, I feel kind of good about this. Here's a good example where I'm drawing perspective and practicing, but and here I could see that I'm not just doing perspective, but also contrast and solidity, and sort of getting some compositional idea in there. But really I wanted to be able to practice and have the confidence that my practice was going to produce a very well-rounded skill set. I didn't want to just be good at anatomy and therefore kind of be limited to just drawing figures or characters. And I didn't want to be just really good at rendering and not really have a good sense of solidity or depth or whatever. So I was kind of bouncing around, and it took a long time to sort of distill in my mind what are the things that if I know that I have these and I practice each one and I don't neglect any of these, all my skills are going to come and up to the same level, relatively at the same time, and then therefore my drawings are going to read well and also look coherent. And for storyboarding, that's really what I was trying to get. So the other thing I'll say with the 6 basic drawing skills, it sort of lays itself out. You could see I've written 4 other concepts down here. So for basically, what do you do to practice these? So anatomy, you would do portraits. For depth and perspective, you're going to do landscapes. For solidity, you're going to set up a still life. Something like, or just some sort of, something that you can draw from that's going to give you that practice of seeing a 3-dimensional object. You're looking for the light on the form to really internalize how that looks in real life, which you can't get from books. You really need to do still lifes to get solidity. You really need to look at a 3-dimensional object Um, you really need to look at a three-dimensional object and then turn it into a two-dimensional drawing to gain a powerful skill in solidity. And then composition, you study architecture because that's pretty much pure composition. If you look at the facade of a building, they're taking, the frame, right? The walls. Where do the walls end? Where's the ground, right? And then where's the roof? So you're getting a frame, and then you're dividing in that frame. And sort of arranging. It's pure arrangement. Where the window is going, where the door is going, where's the decorative elements, how are they balancing each other out. So yeah, those are the four areas of sort of kind of subject matter, right? So you have these skills, but then these different subjects are going to strengthen those skills. And then contrast and line control are so abstract, in my opinion, that doing line control exercises, right, where you're sort of taking, you're not drawing any subject in particular. You're simply performing a mechanical repetition to gain a deftness in the hand, to gain a precision. And through repetition, you gain precision and grace. So there's plenty of line control exercises that, although there's no subject here, my hand-eye coordination is developing. And that is sort of what we're looking for, just a pure mechanical hand and eye. Where my eye looks is where I want the lines to be able to move. And I want to be able to sort of just flow my mind's ideas into the pen without really thinking. And so that's why it takes so many repetitions to perform the line control. And then contrast is a very similar thing, except instead of just graceful movements, we're looking for a specific way of building up tone and gradients in a way that's convincing, a convincing illusion of a change, right, from light to dark. And so the more we practice this, the better our eye gets at sort of rendering light on a form. And definitely need a lot of practice on this one. But yeah, we can do cross hatching, but we can also do, if we're using a softer medium like pencil, we can create gradients that are really smooth and aren't built up of lines, but are actually just pure tone. So those two are the most abstract in the sense that you're not going to really practice any specific subject matter with those. Now, the other thing, and the last thing I'll say, is if we look at these 6 basic drawing skills and we think of them in relation to storyboarding, and we think of storyboarding in relation to filmmaking, we can think of the different problems that a storyteller or a director is going to encounter, and really questions of production. So for anatomy, we're going to answer all of the questions on casting, right? Because if we can answer these questions on anatomy, right, is the character tall or thin or short or fat or whatever it is? What kind of costume are they going to wear? How is that going to fit on the anatomy of the character? So we get costumes and we get casting out of looking at anatomy. With depth and landscapes, we're getting sort of locations, right? So if in our storyboard we have accurate anatomy, then we can have accurate costumes on the anatomy. And then if we place that figure in an accurate location in space, then we're answering the production's questions about where do we need to shoot. Are we on the side of a hill? Are we on the top of a building? Are we inside somewhere? Are we outside? So there's all these questions that the production needs to know. And the storyboard is there to answer those questions in a visual way where no one is interpreting the director's words, right? He could describe all this to every different department, but that's laborious. And also people are going to interpret what he says in their own mind and create their own vision. So when we do a storyboard, we're preventing a lot of that errors in communication. For composition, we're getting, we're answering a lot of questions of like, what sort of lens are we going to use? A short lens, a wide lens, depth of field can be involved in composition, things like that. And then solidity is really the light on form as well as contrast. So then we can answer those questions of where does the lighting need to go? Are we going to do natural light or artificial light, or is it going to be a light coming through the window or backlit, frontlit? All these questions are going to be answered. So that's really the key ingredient to a storyboard, is that the storyboard needs to answer all these departments' questions. Everybody on the film set needs to know what they're going to be doing, and the storyboard really facilitates that communication. Now, line control is the only one that doesn't really matter, but it kind of does, because it's our ability to communicate. So if we can't control the line, we can't create the storyboard, and then the storyboard can't answer all the production's questions. So I hope this is clear. This is my practice routine, is to go through each one of these. I usually start with line control and contrast exercises as a warm-up, and then I pick one of the other four, and I use what I call the 3 sources of imagery. So here's another. I'm throwing a lot at you right now. I am working on the book Up to Speed on storyboarding, and it goes into and lays all this out. But I'll just sort of get this out of my head in a video. Really, the video series is going to be much more of me demonstrating these skills, because that's the power of video, like I was saying, is to actually move and control to display the techniques. But we have the 3 sources of imagery, which are from life, from reference, which would be like a print, a 2-dimensional drawing or a print or something, and then from imagination, which is just going to be from what's inside our heads. So if we can learn to draw from life, from reference, or from our imagination, then we're really going to have everything we need to produce a really awesome storyboard that gets us where we want to go, which is to make our ideas and stories in our heads into something reality, something real that we can share. So thank you for your time. I'm glad you were here, and I will see you in the next one, where I will go into much more drawing. I'll just probably, get some more coffee and sit down and go and practice. Pick one of these subject matters to draw, and then spend some time drawing it and really get these skills internalized. I'm still pretty much a beginner on this, and I only recently put all this together to have a really strong practice regimen. So the next video is just going to be sort of me starting on my practice routine and building up as much skill as I can. And I hope you'll join me for that. Until next time, grab your pen and get some paper and move it around.